In this episode of This Week in Photo, it is a Photokina roundup. This is TWiP. This episode of This Week in Photo is brought to you by our good friends at Bay Photo. Bay Photo is a photo lab located in Scotts Valley, California. They've been around for a long time, and these guys know what they're doing. One of the cool things about Bay Photo that I really enjoy is their attention to detail when it comes to not only printmaking, but also customer service, which, as someone who's making a living with photography is one of the most important things. Having someone on the other end of the line to answer your questions and to help you through the process of getting your prints made is phenomenal. And these guys know what they're doing. And I'll tell you a little personal anecdote. Bay Photo is one of the reasons why I no longer own a physical printer in my home, because I have the internet and I have Bay Photo, and there's a such thing as UPS and FedEx that can send me prints that are made from their state-of-the-art equipment directly to my doorstep. So Bay Photo is sponsoring this episode of This Week in Photo. If you head over to twip.pro/bayphoto, that's twip.pro/bayphoto, they will knock 25% off your order for new accounts. That's twip.pro/bayphoto, and I like to personally thank Bay Photo for their support of This Week in Photo. Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of This Week in Photo. I'm your host, Frederick Van Johnson. In this episode of the show, I'm sitting down with TWiP Pro member and friend of Frederick, Mr. Stephen Scharf. We're gonna be diving into what we think are some of the more interesting things that were released at this year's Photokina 2018. There's some interesting things that popped up and some not so interesting things. We're going to focus on the interesting things in the interest of positivity here. So Stephen Scharf, welcome to This Week in Photo, man. How you doing?
Fine. I'm doing well. It's good to see you again, and thanks for having me back on the show. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. You're welcome. You know, I was as I was putting the show together, I was, kind of going through all the Photokina news, and it occurred to me that, one of the more knowledgeable people, like I was telling you when we were text messaging back and forth, one of the more knowledgeable people I know about gear without being too pixel peeping-y, I don't know if that's a word, is you. I mean, you're very, you know about this stuff, you have your preferences, but you don't forsake other brands for the sake of the one that you chose. So I appreciate that level of candor, when it comes to talking about photography gear. And that's what we're going to do today, right? You ready for this?
That sounds great. Yeah, absolutely. Sounds great.
So before we dive in, I want to thank our sponsor for this episode of This Week in Photo, and that's our good friends over at Bay Photo. Bay Photo is helping us keep the lights on, keep my ring light on here, the camera going, all that stuff. And those, as you heard at the top of the show in that sort of insert, Bay Photo, they've been around for a long time. They know what they're doing, and they have been friends of This Week in Photo for literally, I want to say 5 or 6 years or so. We've been working on meetups together, so I know those guys very well. And what they've done for this sponsorship is they're giving a 25% off discount on your first order if you on new accounts. So you just go over to bayphoto.com, and if you're a new account, you'll get the discount, or just go to twip.pro/bayphoto. That's twip.pro/bayphoto. It'll redirect you over there. One of the reasons for going to the twip.pro link is so that we can count you and let Bay Photo know that, hey, your advertising is working on This Week in Photo. So anyway, I wanted to just let you know about that sponsorship that's going on right now. But Stephen, before we dive in, anything fantastical or cool happening in your world? Yeah. I know you and I talked a while back. You're planning on going to the Fuji event, right? That's coming up in a couple of weeks here, right?
It is. It's coming up next Friday, Friday of next week, October 5 through the 7th. So I'll be flying down Thursday and spending 3 days there, and doing a whole bunch of workshops, which I'm looking forward to, including a really cool street photography workshop with Zaisa Cruz-Bashani that was discovered in Hong Kong by Rick Rocamora, who's a very well-known photo documentary photographer. And the story about her is interesting, is he found her in Hong Kong and thought she's the new Vivian Maier of Asia. And he called the editor of the New York Times and said, "You've got to check this person's work out." And so now she's a Fuji photographer, and she's leading a wonderful street photography workshop for a full day. So I'm really looking forward to that. And then there's going to be some mini courses throughout the next 3 days as well. So that's going to be really exciting. And then I'm taking Rich Baum's real estate photography course.
Oh, yeah. I had Rich Baum on the show. What was it, last year? Yeah.
No, it was March of this year, actually. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
the years are turning into blurs for me.
So I remember listening to that show driving in the car one day and thinking that's an area of professional photography I wanted to get into and stuff. So it turned out that I reached out to Rich via Facebook, and he had a workshop coming up the week after the Fujifilm workshop. So I'll be going up to Auburn for that for 2 days, which is going to be great.
Very cool. Well, good. Yeah. Well, lots of cool stuff. You folks in the chat room may notice that Chris Berry's not in there, because you know why? Chris Berry is gallivanting around the trade show floor in Germany at Photokina, and he has promised me he's going to do a special report for TWiP on some of the exciting things that he's seen on the show floor. Look for that in the YouTube channel in the next couple of days. But yeah, speaking of Photokina, lots of cool stuff, huh? It's been
absolutely
quite the show. It's been, and I would say this has been kind of a Kina year, right? It's been it's been a Photokina kind of year. There's been releases after releases, culminating or sort of maybe even leading up to Photokina. A lot of these camera manufacturers held off on their releases for Photokina to get the most bang for their marketing buck, right? So off the top, you know, I know you've been watching the news. I know you've seen a lot of cool stuff, and I've got my own opinions. What do you think? What so far? What is the coolest, the sort of coolest releases that you've seen at Photokina?
You know, for me, well, a couple of things, right? There were a lot of announcements the last couple of weeks about the Canon and Nikon mirrorless entries, which caused a lot of kind of, internet buzz and commotion, a lot of discussion and things like that. And some folks were pretty excited about this, and other folks were kind of, comparing to other brands and saying, where those brands fell short. I did see a report from Matt Granger today at the Canon booth, and he said that there were tons of people there, that it was very active. And his view was there's a huge installed base of Canon owners. Oh, yeah. And it doesn't matter, basically what other brands are doing, these folks are not going to abandon Canon, and I'm sure this is true for Nikon owners as well. They're interested in Canon offerings. They've got probably a large collection of Canon lenses and peripherals, and they're interested in those products. And I expect that despite what maybe all of the internet punditry has been saying in terms of benchmarking against Sony as the benchmark here, those cameras are going to sell really well into their respective markets for full frame.
I think you're right, and I think it's interesting, the dynamic that you see over the years online. There's always the vocal few, right, that claim to know the truth, and the way, and they can read the tea leaves and they know what's going to happen, and Sony's going away because Nikon and Canon are in the game now, or conversely, Nikon and Canon are finally in the game, so this or Sony, you can't beat Sony because they have too much of a lead, yada yada. No one knows. No one knows. Like
no, they don't.
And like you and I were talking about earlier this week, that no one. It's with this stuff. It's I don't want to go out on a limb and say true photographers, but I'll say some of the more seasoned photographers. The more seasoned the photographer, the less they talk about gear. Right?
That's correct.
Like you were saying you were over on RGG EDU enjoying some of their tutorials, and you notice that they don't really obsess about gear. They don't talk about the camera. Like you have to kind of catch a frame and pause it to even see what camera that they're shooting with. Right? It's more about the technique and lighting. It's all about that, right?
That's absolutely correct. I think Rob Grimm in his beer tutorial, which is wonderful, by the way. I think he spent like 5 seconds talking about the camera he was shooting with. He said, I'm shooting with this Sony, but it's mounted on a boom, but we're talking a lot about lighting. And I would say that 95% of the content is about them managing the light and getting the light and the framing exactly right. And that's where all the knowledge is. You know, that's where I'm just glued to the TV watching these incredible videos and just watching how Tomas and Rob are, you know, feathering a strip light to get
obsessively,
the label,
yeah,
obsessively, just to
yeah.
get that label to light up in just the right way. So they didn't talk about, and then you go to their Facebook group, which I just joined, right? And there's incredible imagery there, and people aren't talking about eye control or autofocus points or any of that stuff, right? They're talking about like, wow, that's beautiful. That's a beautifully lit model and really well posed, things like that.
Yeah, because in the end, I mean, we don't call ourselves cameramen or camera women. We call ourselves photographer, which is recorder of light, right?
Right. We're not focus pullers and grips.
Right, right. I mean, although in Japan they call photographers cameraman, right? So
that's right.
We're cameramen over there, but what they really mean to say is we're photographers. We're recorders of light. So what did you see? I know you saw this. So there's been some Fuji announcements. I want to talk about the Panasonic stuff because obviously that's near and dear to my heart. But I want to give you the stage first to give us the rundown on the Fuji stuff that you've seen and any other stuff, not necessarily Fuji, any other stuff that you saw that kind of piqued your interest.
Well, just to, you know, before I jump into the Fuji stuff, I'm really excited about the Panasonic announcements as well, that consortium between Leica, Sigma, and Panasonic. I think there's going to be you can just look at the evolution of the, you know, it's been 10 years now since the first mirrorless cameras that Panasonic released. And there's been an incredible amount of innovation in that line of cameras. And I think that we're going to continue to see that. So I think that's really exciting. With respect to Fujifilm, the big news is the X-T3 hit the market, you know, as we discussed a couple of weeks ago. That's been just a big win. There's kind of reports from end users coming in right now that are, you know, folks are customers taking delivery of their cameras, and they're loving the performance features. That camera, you know, just kind of ramped up the performance features considerably, both with respect to stills and video photography, and that's all I'll kind of say about that. But the two big news is Fujifilm's continuing to extend their portfolio in the medium format mirrorless class of cameras. So they just introduced their new rangefinder style GFX50R, exactly the same sensor and processor as the GFX50S, much more compact body. So it's actually a little bit smaller than a Canon 5D in most dimensions and lighter. And they're even introducing a little 50 millimeter compact pancake lens for that camera as well. Wow. And it looks like kind of an oversized X Pro 1 in terms of its size. Exactly the same image quality from the GFX50S, so you can expect really nice image quality from that. And then, of course, you probably saw the notes about everybody's talking about their new 100 megapixel camera.
Yeah, tell us about that. Tell us about that. And do we need that? Like that 100 megapixels. That's not for mortals, right?
No.
that is for people that need those pixels because they need to do microsurgery on images, like retouchers or people that need that level of flexibility. Like, in your opinion, who's that camera for? Who's Fuji targeting that at?
Well, I think that, you know, they're targeting it very much at fashion and studio and commercial editorial photographers. I mean, the hardcore guys that work in studios like Rob Grimm, those kinds of guys, right?
Commercial photographers, right? Commercial and advertising folks,
the serious commercial photographers, right? Wayne Johns is a really extraordinary fashion and commercial editorial photographer.
Who, by the way, is coming on the show in a couple of weeks.
That's fantastic because his work is amazing.
Yep.
And he shoots with the GFX50S right now. And he studied fine art, and so when he was in college, and so you can see that in his work. But it's folks like him that really I think this camera is for. And again, it's going to be like the way Rob works. You know, when you shoot with these types of cameras, 100 megs of resolution, that camera has to be locked down, right, and very tightly controlled with respect to its position and making sure that there's no motion from the level of resolution it's going to have. It's also going to have video capabilities and IBIS, which I think, you know, I heard some buzz that this is kind of Fuji kind of, you know, showing their engineering chops, you know, to the rest of the world, like, hey, nobody's done a medium format, you know, sensor with IBIS and 4K 30p video, so we're going to show you what we can do with that. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. I'm not sure where I see a commercial market for medium format level cinema video production, but maybe there's a new class. I don't know. We'll see.
You never know, Stephen Scharf. I'm going to go out on a limb and say you and I were born too early, man. So you don't know what theaters of the future or home theaters or whatever, or what the needs are going to be. Yeah. So.
Yeah. But I would say, both, even the GFX50S is very much, a studio camera, systems camera, and I would expect the 100 is. It's going to fit right into the marketplace where Phase One just announced their 150 megapixel IQ4. Right? Who needs that level of resolution? Right? I'm not really sure. Maybe architectural photographers and folks that are doing huge, really high resolution fashion work. But along with that, I think the other major announcement is the fact that that Capture One, which I think stunned everybody because they've been so reticent about supporting other medium format cameras. Like, no, we're simply not going to support anything larger than a full frame, quote unquote, 35 millimeter size sensor camera, period. And now they've got full support for all the medium format Fujifilm cameras, as well as their Phase One backs and all of the regular cameras that they support as well, which I think took everybody by surprise, including me. And I think we're all really pleasantly surprised by that. So that's really great news. And I've been playing with some GFX50 files from last year that I took in Capture One, and they look amazing. So yeah, it's really a nice development.
Do you see yourself like moving into that world? I know you mentioned earlier on that you're dabbling, or you got a toe in the real estate photography world, right? Yeah. So you could theoretically justify it. Are you thinking in that direction?
Right now, I wanted to see what medium format was like last year when I rented one for about a week or so, just to kind of get what the experience was like. And it's certainly everything that the folks that shoot in medium format regularly say that it is. There's levels of control over tonality and headroom and detail that you simply do not get from smaller format cameras. Yeah. Right now, I don't see personally that I have a need for something like that in a photography-based business. If I moved into like a Jeffrey Totaro type of architectural business, which may happen at some point in time, then I would definitely be looking at a camera, probably like the GFX50S level medium format for that kind of work. Jeff shoots with a Phase One, if I remember correctly. Yeah. But I think for real estate work, I think an APS-C camera or a full frame camera is fine.
So that's the other thing. So lots of new cameras, more megapixels or more pixels to play with. Support from Capture One. Before we sort of dive into some of the other stuff? What's your thoughts on Capture One? Because we've been talking about them over the years, or increasingly so over the years. And it's kind of at a fever pitch now as being the, I don't know, the adults version or the pro version of Lightroom. Are we there yet? Is it time for people to start considering Capture One?
Absolutely. I think you've heard Troy Miller talk about this in some of the photo critiques.
All the time. He won't shut up about
all the time. Yeah. And I've been using actually Capture One since version 7, because back when I first bought a Fuji, they were the only company that did proper raw conversions that were worth a damn off that camera. And been upgrading ever since. But version 11 was really a big step up for Phase One with that release. That really took Capture One up to another level entirely. And I think there's a lot of companies that we've discussed on TWiP Pro and many of your interviews that there's a lot of opportunities companies are seeing for challenging the Adobe subscription model of Lightroom and Photoshop. Yeah. And I think this is certainly true with Capture One. And they've added a lot of very powerful features, including layers and layer masking. And it's becoming more like a hybrid between Lightroom and Photoshop now. And Matt Granger just did a little comparison himself. He's going to move over to Capture One as well, and he did a nice little studio shoot looking at skin tones of a model between Lightroom and Capture One, and he said he really preferred them, and I know that Troy does as well. Yeah. And I do too. I mean, there's, if you start working in it enough, you start to see that you're working in a true ICC profile color managed workflow, and you get that level of nuance and detail and gradation of tone and color, in Capture One. And this is why so many professionals like Rob at RGG EDU is shooting in Capture One.
Yeah, absolutely. But then the other side of it is, it's not for everyone, right? Because like we were saying, it does skew more towards the pro side. And for you know, a giant group, who knows what the percentage is, half, 75%, whatever. Lightroom is more than enough, and it's more than adequate. And then you overlay on top of that the integration of Lightroom and Photoshop working together hand in hand, the round tripping, although I know you can round trip out of other apps as well. And then the third piece is, if you need Photoshop, right, which most of us do, like if you're going to do serious retouching or commercial work or that kind of thing, Photoshop is kind of the, at least currently as we record this, it is the app that you need that comes as part of that extortion, I mean the subscription that you get from Adobe, right? So
that's right.
If you got it anyway, you know, that, I mean, that's the marketing argument for it. But on the other side of it, for me at least, and I'm speaking solely for me, when I look at Capture One, I used to work at Adobe on Lightroom, so when I look at Capture One and I look at Lightroom, it just feels like this, like Capture One is the young adult, and Lightroom is the teenager that's transitioning into adulthood, kind of, right? It just, they have I don't know if it's the UI or it's the user base or whatever. It just feels like Capture One is more of a pro tool, and Lightroom is not to say that you're not going to get pro work out of it, but it just feel, once you look at Capture One and you look at Lightroom, you start seeing that, oh, okay, that's a, you know, that's those pic, you know, it's a little bit juvenile compared to this one on that side. So yeah,
I would certainly say that Capture One kind of bridges a gap between the capabilities of Lightroom and Photoshop. And as you know, Capture One has a lot of Photoshop integration support as well. But there's levels of control over tonality, color ranges. I think Troy has talked about that, as Troy Miller's talked about that. And even when you use the what they call the high dynamic range tools to pull back highlights and recover shadows, unlike Lightroom, when you do those moves in Capture One, you don't crush the contrast curve to a really soft, dull gray. It's, for some reason, they can kind of maintain the contrast profile, which Lightroom right now can't do when you start to make big moves on the highlights and shadow sliders.
Yeah, it gets a little clunky in there. And Trevor Panaki in the chat room is saying Capture One is on their tethered shooting, at least, is on a completely different level, and that's I'm glad he brought that up, because that's one of the things that draws people over to Capture One. In Lightroom, you can do tethered shooting, but it's a different kind of metaphor, the watch folder, all this stuff, right? Capture One is what I would argue is what you would see in a commercial photography environment in New York City or LA or Chicago, whatever, with the client looking at the big screen. They're going to be looking at Capture One on that screen for the most part, and not Lightroom. Whereas if you're maybe a wedding shooter or someone that's not doing commercial type work with those kinds of clients that are looking over your shoulder, Lightroom might be the go-to tool for it. But the cool thing is we have both, right? So
we do. And I fully expect I'll continue to use Lightroom. Certainly, you know, I'm fast with Lightroom because I've been using it since the very first beta before it ever shipped in 2006. And I certainly will probably continue to use it for my racing photography because it's, you know, it still could be sped up in terms of importing files and stuff like that. But as Troy Miller has pointed out numerous times, and Trevor's correct, you know, the level of control you have in Capture One and the ability to tether. I was just tethering last night for the first time with my Fuji. I made a little video uploaded to TWiP Pro on how to tether with a Fujifilm X-T2.
Cool.
But you can take direct control over the camera from within Capture One, and it's got really nice tools for checking your focus and checking, you know, how you've got the frame composed and all of those things. So there's a lot more integration of tethering into the entire Capture One application itself, so that the connection between the tethering functionality and the editing functionality is more tightly integrated.
Yeah, and I want to move on back to Photokina. We'll go back to Germany in a second, but one of the gripes I hear about Capture One, you know, full disclosure, and you know, talking about the good and the bad, is that the interface is more complex and harder to grok or harder to learn than Lightroom, right? Which goes along with being an adult, right? You know, we have adult problems versus teenager problems, right? So just, you know, if you download the demo or, you know, and play around with Capture One, you know, for my own learning process is just dive in and learn it, right? It's just, the thing is, don't compare it to Lightroom, and don't be looking for, you know, direct parallels of this tool equals that tool and this is that. And, you know, it's not a version of Lightroom. It is a completely different animal altogether. It has a completely different approach to how it deals with images. So if you go in under that light, then you'll understand. If you go in under this is Lightroom Pro assumption, you're going to get lost. So
yeah, I would say, you know, just to finish off that thought, Frederick, that a lot of the basic editing controls are very similar to Lightroom. You know, the management of the exposure, contrast, the highlight and shadows, the curves, the clarity, and all of those sliders are very similar. Where I see the biggest difference is how Capture One handles file, importing, and destination. Those things can be quite a bit more confusing for someone that's used to Lightroom. And that's, for me, was kind of the bigger part of the learning curve, was understanding where are my files going, where are they located, how do I get to them, things like that.
Yeah.
But if you play with Capture One for a bit, you know, a couple of weeks, and you're familiar with Lightroom, I would say that you'll be familiar with 80% of it pretty quickly. Yeah. And then mastering the other 20% is going to take more work.
Yeah. Yeah, the good news is we've got lots of tools now, right? Like I said, we've got Lightroom, we've got Capture One, we've got Luminar, we've got, you know, it goes on and on. So we've got lots of stuff to play with. But, you know, I guess the point is to get out there and shoot and not obsess over this kind of stuff.
That's right.
So let's move on. Let's go back to Germany. So anything else on your sort of Fuji list? I know they did some sort of ancillary announcements with things like the Instax Square and those sorts of things. Do you have one of those? And tell us what it is, for one. What's the Instax Square?
It's like a little point-and-shoot camera that has built-in like Polaroid-style film, and you can get different format cameras. And so it's basically a little point-and-shoot camera with a simple viewfinder and a fixed focal length lens. And I think it's probably, I don't know, I think you can adjust the aperture as well, but you can print right out of the camera. And like we were talking a couple of weeks ago, particularly young adults really seem to like the tangibility of prints and sharing prints between each other. So this line of products has just taken off enormously for Fujifilm in the last couple of years. They literally cannot make the product fast enough. So they have a line of cameras that print in the smaller kind of more traditional aspect ratio. I think it's a 4:3 or whatever it is.
4:3, yeah.
Yeah, and then there's a square, which is really cool as well, which is a larger photograph. And there's some new cameras, I think, that you just saw announced that are for that series. So they're kind of cranking out the camera bodies, and then there's the little printers you can get to integrate with your own phones, is what your smartphones or your digital cameras. So you can just buy the printer if you just want to use the film. But if you're out doing street photography, I'm sure Val does this sort of thing, and Bert Stefani, some of the other folks that do street photography, right? They'll often give a print to someone that they've taken a photograph of in a street situation, and people really like that. That kind of connects the photographer to the subject in a nice way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, like, you know, we talk about it on the show a lot. It seems like printing is enjoying a resurgence and a re-understanding of the permanence of atoms versus electrons. Right? I say that all the time, and I think it's important, right, to have prints on the wall and see your work and share it with other people, and it says something. It's almost like giving someone a handwritten letter or a card versus sending them an e-card. Right?
Yes.
So an e-card is like, oh, you could have sent this to 12 million people, and it's the same as the first one. You give them a handwritten one, you had to take your time, get carpal tunnel, and scratch that thing out, and then lick the envelope, and then give it to them. So there's effort that goes into that, which means something, right? Especially these days.
And you can't go back and do it over, so you have to really think through what it is you want to put into the card, whether it's a painting or a photograph or a nice note or something. The British photographer Kevin Mullins is a wonderful wedding photographer. He's created a side business of a series he does for families called A Day in the Life, and he'll go and literally just spend a day with this family and just capture these wonderful candid moments of kids and parents interacting with their kids and the family interacting, and the product is prints. He doesn't give them digital files. He gives them a book that they can carry forward for the rest of their lives and look at this day in a slice of part of their family history over time, and that's the product. And I was thinking the other day, that's a very cool way to differentiate yourself as a professional photographer, is to give something tangible to your clients that creates meaning in their lives. And prints do that.
Yeah. And I want to remind the folks there in the chat room, give us a thumbs up in there if you like the content. If you like what we're cooking here, give us a thumbs up. That helps us get discovered by other people on YouTube, etc. And it just makes me feel good when I see the thumbs up coming there. So, go ahead, give us a thumbs up. Make Frederick feel good. All right, let's move on. So what one of the big announcements, at least the biggest announcement for me, because I am a Lumix ambassador. I love Lumix. I was shooting Lumix before I started working with Panasonic. And the one thing that you hear, the argument that you hear all the time about Lumix, Micro Four Thirds, Olympus, whatever, is sensor size. It's the one thing, like, it would be perfect because the UI is superior, all this other stuff is superior to other cameras, but they're hamstrung by that Micro Four Thirds sensor, which I argue with, because in my opinion, and I'll get to the Photokina news in a second. I just want to get on my soapbox for a second. In my opinion, the small sensor is a huge asset to the Micro Four Thirds system, right? So, the one negative of a small sensor is low light performance, obviously, right? Because it's just plain physics. It's a smaller area for those photons to hit. So, notwithstanding shooting in dark environments where you'd have to use another tool to shoot, the camera performs flawlessly, and it's small, it fits in my bag, it does the things that I need to do. You're looking at me through a Lumix camera right now. This is an older model, multiple-year-old model GH4 with a 15mm f1.7 lens on it. That's what I'm streaming to you on right now. So it works for this kind of work. It works for still photography. I love the UI and how the UI language translates to the other bodies, but it was that sensor size that held most people up. And the narrative was, people would go into a camera store and they'd say, yeah, I heard from insert, like you were saying, Stephen, insert pundit from YouTube, I need a full frame camera. It's all about full frame. That's the best of the best, regardless of what the subject matter of what they're shooting is. I just need a full frame. So they, and then they would trickle down from there, when in a lot of cases, a Micro Four Thirds or APS-C even sensor would be the right one for them. But what Panasonic did, I think, with the introduction of this R series, is they answered that question. So now the sentence can be, oh, I need a full frame. Okay, well, here are the bodies that are good for you, right? Or I don't need a full frame. I'm going to be shooting this kind of photography. Well, you can go with Micro Four Thirds, and therefore you can do all these other things. Or I'm going to be shooting more video than still, so get Micro Four Thirds. The other thing that I saw online about this release, this whole Panasonic moving to full frame, is incorrect. Panasonic is not moving to full frame. Panasonic has added full frame to their lineup. Correct. They are not killing Micro Four Thirds. They are adding full frame to their camera lineup. Not only did they add full frame to their camera lineup, they partnered with, like you said, Stephen, they partnered with Leica and Sigma to
very smart. Yeah,
to utilize this brand new mount. And then the other piece of news, there's a bunch of news. The other piece of news was they announced that by the end of 2020, or I think it's by 2020, they will have 10 lenses out, a total of 10 lenses out that fit this new mount. Because, of course, if you're going full frame, you need a new mount. You can't use the old Micro Four Thirds lenses. So they'll have 10 new lenses out, and they introduced the Panasonic Professional Services team.
That's correct.
Like Nikon Professional and Canon, right? So when I look at all that news, I look at it like, okay, these guys are getting serious about answering the needs that professional photographers are asking for. I need weather sealed bodies. I need full frame. I need this. I need that. I need support if I'm in the field shooting a job and my camera fails or something happens to it. I need backup. They answer. They're in the process of building that sentence, and by 2020, it sounds like that sentence will pretty much be there with 20 lenses and all these, these new bodies that shoot full frame. What did you think of this? So you're a Fuji shooter, Stephen. When you see this kind of announcement, and you look at it through the lens of Nikon just made their full frame mirrorless announcement, Canon made theirs, Fuji's moving forward, you know, and innovating in their own way. What's your opinion of the Panasonic announcement? Is it
I'm really
too little, too late, or is it right on time?
Well, it's probably right on time. I think it was. I think the way I look at it is they're enhancing their portfolio of products, and they're meeting a set of needs. I think that they're going to target probably a set of professionals that do require that size sensor, and I think the key thing that you talked about, which for me is always key, which people tend to forget about a lot, is the professional services aspect of it. I mean, you know, Canon is probably the benchmark in this, and I'm sure Nikon is as good as well, but CPS has taken really good care of me when I used to shoot with their pro gear over the years, right? I mean, 3-day turnarounds, they wouldn't charge you for like the parts that went inside the lens for the repair, just the labor, you know, crazy good professional services system. And it's great that Panasonic is introducing that, because that's a component that a lot of folks don't think about when they buy into a system. They get all excited about the bells and whistles and the features and the eye control and the 693 autofocus points, and they don't think about, like, is the camera company going to stand behind this product and service and warranty it and provide customer service and somebody I can talk to? Do I get reasonable turnaround times for repairs, things like that? That's all part of living with a camera system. Just so you know, Frederick, I owned a Micro Four Thirds system for about 4 years. I had both the Olympus original MD EM5 and then EM1.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
But I didn't use Olympus lenses with it. I used those wonderful little Panasonic 12 to 35 and 35 to 100 f2.8s, which were absolutely gorgeous lenses.
Yeah,
and I remember, you know, I could fit the EM1 and those two zooms in a little think tank bag that was literally like this big. It was about the size of a small loaf of bread. And that was a perfect, amazing system for travel. I mean, you know, it literally was like this big, the bag. It was that tall, that big.
You can't possibly have been able to get good photos with something that small, Stephen.
Well, you know, I like that saying Scott Bourne has, that photography is about going and shooting in light. Yeah. Right. So I'm not really interested in shooting, you know, a black cat in a tunnel per se.
Exactly. My saying is, I'm not really interested in shooting a black cat in a dark closet. Right.
Right.
If I need to shoot that, then, you know, maybe I'll get a flashlight or something.
So I really like that system a lot, and I love the quality of the lenses that have been available, both from Olympus and for Panasonic. They've been superb, and it's so compact and light and easy to carry around, and the image quality you get from it is really, really, really good. So I really like the Micro Four Thirds system. You know, the Fuji system for me was a better fit, just in terms of what the kind of cameras I grew up with. The control system just was a better fit for me in terms of how I think about my process, which is why I stayed with it. But I love that little Micro Four Thirds system that I had. And I've mentioned to you, if Fuji didn't have this line of APS-C cameras available right now, I'd be shooting with a G9.
Yeah. You played with the G9 for a while. I remember. Yeah, you took it to the Sacramento Zoo and put it through paces. That's still my daily driver, the G9. I love the G9. I've got a couple of Panasonic cameras, but the G9 is that's the one. When I first got it, I think for the first 3 days it was, you know, on the nightstand next to me. You know how that goes. You get a new piece of gear, like, you know, it's got to be close, just in case I need to learn something, you know.
I shot it with it for 2 hours at a Mike's Camera Day at the Sacramento Zoo on May 5th, and I was really impressed with it. And, you know, it's got a control system that was a lot like my Canon Pro cameras. So it felt right at home. I could immediately start using it. I knew where everything was, how it worked. It was just very intuitive. And it was very, well, as you know, it's extremely responsive. But it's just a really nice system. It just felt, you know, it didn't get in the way of the process of focusing on your photography, the intellectual process of focusing on your photography, right? And the Fuji system for me is the same way. It just gets out of the way and lets you get on with the process of thinking about how do I create compelling and engaging photographs. And that's what I liked about the G9. It was just like, oh, I know how to use this. It's right at home. I can forget about having to figure out how to use the camera, and I can focus on what I'm here for, which is making photographs.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like we were saying at the top of the show, this is a great time to be around for photographers, right? Because we have all these choices. We live in an era where pretty soon we're gonna have a full frame all the way down to Micro Four Thirds option from Panasonic Lumix. We've got this amazing array of cameras from Fujifilm. Canon and Nikon are coming on strong finally with their offerings to sort of get the people that were on the fence about moving to mirrorless off the fence, and they can stay with the same brand. So, you know, I was telling who was it earlier? Oh, Giulio Shorio. I was talking to Giulio earlier. We were on a phone call and we were discussing this, and he's lukewarm on the whole Panasonic announcement because I think he feels like, you know, they missed the first mover advantage and Sony has too much of a head start, etc. And all these other players are in the game now. So, you know, the Lumix,
I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, and that's what I said. You know, I said, you know, I had two responses to that. I said, first of all, number one, no one has a crystal ball. We don't know what's going on. We don't know what's happening on the whiteboards in Japan, you know, as they lay out these camera systems, one. And number two, who cares, right? I mean, like literally, who cares? The camera systems that I own now, if I were to use them all and put them through above average use, will outlive me, right?
That's right.
And I will never use them to the max of like, this camera sucks because it won't do A, B, and C. Like we're kind of surfing the wave. Like when we get on that whole high horse of, well, it's too little too late and they should have done this back in 2015 and this all that. Who cares, right? We're consumers. We consume. They're manufacturers. They build stuff. Let's just keep that relationship and not try to get into, you know, mix our peanut butter with their chocolate. So. Yeah,
and I think the whole thing about, there's a mystique about full frame that I think has gotten, as I've watched digital photography evolve technologically over the last 15 years, it's gotten a little in my mind distorted, because the reason that people originally wanted full frame, and the first full frame digital camera was the Canon 1DS back in 2003, was resolution, because a larger sensor meant you could have more pixels for more resolution, and better noise performance, because the pixels could be larger for that given resolution. Those were the two compelling reasons to have a full frame camera. But things have really changed technologically, and those two compelling reasons now no longer apply not only to APS-C cameras, but to Micro Four Thirds cameras as well. So as far as I'm concerned, the original reason that people wanted full frame, oh, I have to have full frame, is a moot point as far as I'm concerned. The only one that I see anymore is folks that feel that they want to have very fine control over depth of field for portraiture, right? And for me, the big downside of full frame is the lenses are too big, damn big and heavy.
Yeah.
I shot with full frame equivalent lenses for 13 years, and they literally broke my back.
Yeah.
And I can't shoot with that much weight anymore. It's that simple.
And you don't have to anymore. That's the thing.
No,
you don't have to. And that's the thing with this Panasonic announcement. You know, what comes along with full frame, you know, we're going back to physics 101 or maybe 301, right? So it's the size of the lens, right? So when you're in a Micro Four Thirds system, like I could literally in the palm of my hand, I can hold 4 or 5 lenses, you know, amazing lenses. Not so much in the full frame world, and not so much in the Panasonic full frame world. The lenses that they announced in Photokina are big, right? They have to be.
They have to be.
They're beautiful, but they are big. They're designed for that full frame, and they answer that full frame question. Like Photo Joseph was saying, by the way, Joseph did a fantastic, he stayed up late, watched the announcement, and then did a roundup of he did that. I watched that a couple times. So if you're interested in this stuff, go to Photo Joseph's channel, Photo Joseph, all one word, on YouTube, and find his Panasonic full frame announcement video. It's like 20 minutes long. It gives you everything you need to know about what they announced. And one of the things that he was saying in that video was that part of the magic of Micro Four Thirds or these smaller sensors are the smaller lenses. And for people like me,
absolutely,
that like to travel light, and I got a bunch of you and I were talking earlier, I got a bunch of other stuff I need to carry around with me if I travel for audio and all this other stuff.
Right.
That needs to go in my bag too. So
yeah,
a bunch of lenses. If I have 2 camera bodies, maybe 3 lenses, audio gear, microphones, cables, all this stuff, it can add up quickly, and you swap that out with full frame, then it becomes a multiple bag kind of situation, right? So
that's absolutely right.
Yeah,
you know, there's no getting around the optics that full frame lenses, and I did a little analysis on this in Excel a couple years ago. If you compare equivalent professional lenses like a 72-2.8, a 24-70-2.8, you know, whatever, you know, size lens, full frame lenses, either for a DSLR or a mirrorless camera like a Sony mirrorless, are on average 30 to 35% larger and heavier than an APS-C lens, and about twice the size of a micro four thirds lens. So if you need that, if you need those lenses, and that meets your requirements, by all means you should buy that. But the two compelling advantages that I hear people tout for full frame right now are, oh, I have better control over depth of field, you know, with a full frame sensor than I do a smaller sensor. That's true to some extent. Or that the noise performance is better. Well, the noise performance is a little bit better, but if you look at the data, like in photons to photos, you compare, for example, Fujifilm X-H1 and a Sony A7 III. At their base ISO of 200, there's a 1/6 of a stop difference in dynamic range.
Wow,
it's not a lot.
Yeah, okay? that's a step forward or back, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. So I understand that if that's what, you know, people want and need, there's now 4 entrants that will deliver a portfolio of products for folks like that. Yeah. For me personally, I just can't carry that much weight around anymore. I physically can't do it and don't want to.
Yeah. Yeah,
and if I want really,
no, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Steve.
If I want really fine depth control over depth of field, I'm going to shoot a medium format Fuji with medium format lenses, which outperform optically smaller format lenses. And a 35 millimeter lens compared to a full frame medium format lens, pardon me, is a smaller format lens, and it's got compromises optically that a medium format lens doesn't have to make. And so you not only get a finer degree of depth of field control, they just work better optically with respect to their interaction with the sensor.
Yeah. Well, you hit on a really good point that I think gets lost on a lot of us, especially around Photokina and WPPI and Photo Plus Expo times, trade show times for photographers. And I was telling Julio this. We were talking about the Petapixel article. There's a Petapixel article that came out. It is titled "A Plea." What is it called? A Plea to Panasonic. I'll link to it in the show notes for this. But it basically, the gist was, you know, I scrolled down to the bottom to get to the actual plea, and the plea was not to you know, kill Micro Four Thirds, which they never said they had any intention of doing. No. And in fact, everything I said before, and you know, not that I have deep inside knowledge of what Panasonic is doing, it looks like they're building a sentence, right? And they're answering questions. Why would you, you know, do a comma and do the end of the sentence and then delete the first part of the sentence? Right. You know, they're building a narrative of they're answering photographers at different levels, right?
Absolutely.
Micro Four Thirds isn't going away. I think part of the problem with a lot of us photographers, a lot of photographers in general, is we live in this galaxy of or. Right? It's got to be this or that. It's got to be full frame or Micro Four Thirds. It's got to be that brand or this brand. It's got to be RAW or JPEG. You know, but in the real world, there's this word called "and," right?
Yes, that's right.
It can be "and." You don't have to silo yourself. You could say, you know what? I'm going to use my Micro Four Thirds stuff for this stuff, but I need the full frame because I want to try this. Like, I'm going through this beer photography tutorial on RGG EDU, and I want to try some beer photography, so I'm going to use the full frame on that, right?
Or you might, like Frederick, you know, you want to get into astrophotography, and you're going to need, you know, the noise performance. You know, what full frame gives you is it gives you probably a really nice balance between noise performance, sensor size for situations when you're shooting in lower light. So for astrophotography, right? And you're going to get maybe a stop of performance difference, say, over APS-C, depending on the sensor design. But what I see Panasonic doing in Sigma, well, Sigma is looking at extending their market because they see DSLR marketplace declining, so they need to extend into the mirrorless realm.
Yeah.
Which is why they're doing this. But, you know, they're just they're broadening their portfolio in the same exact way Fujifilm did by going into medium format. They're just offering a broader range of options to photographers that have very clear requirements for what they need for photographic tools. It's that simple.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not going to stop. Right. So it's not going to stop. Don't fool yourself into thinking that, oh, 2018 is it. This is the end of the line for releases from these photographers. It goes for everything. Right.
Right.
We're basically, you know, we crap on Adobe all the time about their Creative Cloud subscription. But in reality, everything's a subscription, you know, when you're a photographer, because you're going to be upgrading your camera every now and then. You know, it's a reoccurring expense that you are going to incur. You're going to upgrade your camera. You're going to upgrade your phone. You're going to upgrade your computer. You're going to upgrade your house. You know, everything is a subscription going forward, and it's on a payment plan. So don't fool yourself into thinking you're not. So I want to remind the folks in the chat room that, hey, if you want to ask either Stephen or I, or pose a question to either one of us, you can do so by actually just writing it in the chat, because we don't have Chris Berry to move it into our magic Google Doc today. So we're monitoring the chat room right now. So if you have a question that you want to pose to us, go ahead and throw it in there. We'll get to them right after this this Picks of the Week segment. I'm looking in the Picks of the Week, and Stephen does have a Pick of the Week. Good. So we're gonna do our Picks of the Week, and then we'll jump into the Q&A real quick, and then we'll close the show. So Stephen, you know the deal, man. The Picks of the Week segment is the time of the show where you get to recommend something to the TWiP audience. Could be anything, as long as it's somehow related to photography. Stephen Scharf, what is your Pick of the Week?
So my pick of the week is the RGG EDU professional photography courses that are available at RGG EDU. Just do a search. You can find it. Frederick, you did an interview with these guys in Puerto Rico about 2 months ago, I think it was. Yeah. And that's what got me interested. And I remember that interview. And when they say that the production values for these videos are cinema level quality, they are not kidding. The quality of the content is outstanding. The level of detail, as you and I were communicating earlier this week, Patrick, if you're an aspiring professional photographer or already a professional photographer, want to move into another discipline, you can take this coursework and literally build a business in a new photographic discipline from the level of detail and content that they give you. And in some cases, these courses are over 20 hours long of instruction. And for the prices that they're selling them at, $129, I think they're an incredible bargain. So thank you for turning me on to them. It's been an amazing kind of experience watching these videos and learning what I'm learning about lighting and shooting in a studio in a very controlled environment. It's been great, and I can't recommend their products highly enough. I also downloaded, by the way, their tethering tutorial, which is also free.
Oh, I didn't know the tethering tutorial was free.
Yeah,
cool.
It is. So I've been watching that as well, and that's really cool. So that's my pick of the week. That's
really cool. Yeah, those guys are fantastic, and I was telling you, I had a chance to spend some quality time with them down in Puerto Rico over beers and sweltering heat on the island, and you know, sort of bond with them and get an idea of where they're going and what their sort of mindset and ethos is with regard to the production quality on the tutorials they build. And you know, watch the interview. I'll link to it, but watch the interview. But the long story short is they didn't want to build your standard, hi, I'm John Doe, and today I'm going to teach you how to do A, B, and C. Let's go to the screencast. And then they teach you, and then they come back and maybe a couple slides, and then it's over, right? So they wanted to take it more in a cinematic direction, because both of those guys have, respectively, Gary and Rob have experience in cinematography and documentary filmmaking, as well as a mountain of experience in commercial photography. So they put those two things together and said, hey, what if we apply that to this and do a new kind of tutorial, right? So
if I can just add to that, Frederick, the key thing for me that I love about what they're doing is they're explaining their thought process to you. So when Rob is setting up a shoot and he's telling you how he's setting it up, he's not only telling you what he's going to do, he's telling you why he's going to do what he's going to do. And that informs your thinking process in a way that drives true learning, and the true learning drives true understanding. And you need that understanding to obtain mastery.
Right.
And it's not just like, oh, here's the studio, here I'm popping flashes and stuff. He's explaining his thought process, why he's doing what he's doing. And that's where the real value of that coursework is. And that's unlike anything I've seen so far with stuff like that. That's the real value.
And it's a real photography too. It's not, it's not,
it is.
One of my pet peeves has always been, you know, with tutorials in general is or reviews, you know, most of it is phoned in from the standpoint of, you know, hey, well, imagine this. You know, well, here's a new feature that this device can do. So what's around me? Hey, I'm gonna take a picture of that wall, right? Look at, you know, instead of doing real work and talking through how the feature works in a real world environment, which is what they do. So they like with that free beer tutorial, they take you into the studio. They go through all the bits and pieces that they need, like, and where you can get them, and how, you know, the tricks for making the ice on the side of the bottle and all that stuff. And they end up with a real photograph, right? A real finished photograph, which is like you were in the studio watching artisans create commercial work, which is in a lot of ways invaluable, and it's free. So
it was amazing. I felt like I was in the studio with Rob and Tomas, and watching Rob dress the bottle with the slush and the spritz and everything, you know, and why he was doing what he was doing. It's just, I'm on the last set of modules. It's really fantastic.
Yeah, that's awesome. Perfect pick of the week. Very cool. Yeah, those guys are friends of TWiP. We did a bunch of podcasts down in Puerto Rico for their podcast. And I believe they'll be releasing them in the coming weeks or so. But we did,
that's great,
I want to say like 9, 10, something like that, with different commercial photographers. And it was all three of us, Rob, Gary, and I, sitting around a table drinking beer with with a professional photographer talking about their work, you know. So it was kind of fun. It's,
once you join RGGED and you buy a product, you get access to their Facebook page. And I got to say, the quality of the work on their Facebook page is off the charts. It's insanely good. Some of the best photographers in the world are putting stuff up there. It's amazing.
Yep, I love it. So my pick of the week is I want to give some love to Photo Joseph, right? So I want to draw a circle around what Photo Joseph is doing over there. So he's got his channel. I've known Joseph since, let's say, before the iPhone. So I've known him for a long time. So he has his channel on YouTube called Photo Joseph, or you can go to his website, photojoseph.com. And he is one of the hardest working people in the online education and content creation business. And a lot of it is thankless, right? Because he gets up there, like he's up in the middle of the night, you know, making notes about the Panasonic announcement to share them on a live stream with the audience, you know.
At 4 in the morning.
At 4 in the morning, he's doing that kind of stuff. He's creating tutorials. He's a Lumix luminary as well, or Lumix ambassador as well. He's doing all this stuff, and it's quality. And I'll say the level of quality of the stuff that Joseph puts out is still tied to his time at Apple. Well, I'll put it like that. You know, you can take the boy out of Apple, but you can't take Apple out of the boy. So he still has a lot of Apple in him, and in the way that he does stuff and the way that he approaches his channel. So if you're at all interested in content creation, photography, you know, video, streaming, all that kind of stuff, he covers all that stuff on his YouTube channel. So definitely get over there and subscribe to him. And that is
He's also a really good teacher. He explains what he's talking about really effectively as well.
Yeah. He knows what he's talking about. You know, if I could only get him to get rid of that beard, right?
That's part of his signature, I think.
That is part of it. It wasn't always there. I knew beardless Joseph, so there's a person underneath there. All right, I'm going to start from the bottom and work my way up with these questions. You ready to start with these questions, Stephen?
Sure.
All right, so I'm going to put them up on the screen here. I think I can do that. The first question is from Trevor. He says, "This week in photo, why are all these bodies hitting the market now? What's special about right now to move into mirrorless?" That's a great question. I don't know what's special about right now. It Who knows? I mean, it just happened. There's nothing special about right now in the industry. It's not like, oh, finally someone hit a vein of silicon or something. And now we're finally able to turn on these machines that are cranking out these mirrors. I don't know.
I think I have maybe a little bit of an answer
Sure.
for Trevor. And I think what it is, and this was actually discussed by Matt Granger at Photokina, and Sony was talking about this, is the sensor technology now is developing at a point where the sensor is capable of throwing so much data at the camera in terms of features and functionality. The processors were not capable of processing that much data to deliver on these specific aspects of functionality. And now I think the computing processing power is catching up to be able to do things like one of the things Sony showed that was really cool that they're working on with their cameras is eye focus on animals for like wildlife photography.
Yeah.
So they've got like video of a lion walking through the Serengeti and the eye focus is locked on his left eye, you know, and it's like, okay, so they're extending that, right? And the reason that they say they're able to do this, and this is why the XT3 was a big jump forward from the XT2, is the processing power of the image processing engines, I think, has taken a quantum leap up based on layering off or piggybacking off the increase in the sensor technology. And I think that's what's driving why now there's all this explosion of things happening, is now we're getting the processing power in the camera image processing engines that allow these sensors to really deliver the functionality that they're capable of, whereas before they simply couldn't commute the math enough, right?
That still doesn't answer the question of why Nikon and Canon have finally decided to jump into the space and Panasonic decided to go full frame. I mean, albeit, you know, we're oversimplifying it, but you know, these companies you don't just like overnight, you know, the CEO has an epiphany and is like, yeah, we need a mirrorless camera. I want one by the end of the week. They're years in development, multiple years in development. They saw the
CFA charts with the DSLR sales going down and the mirrorless going up. And they said, oh, there's an inflection point
here. Market forces, forces. Well, cool. All right, let's move on. Here's another question from Kit Griffin. Kit says, I'm interested in hearing how photographers cull images, say from 100 to 20. Sure, star and flagging is required, but surely not this one is 5 and the next one's a 2 and the next one's a 4. You know, so he's looking for more minutia in there. How do you cull your images like that, Stephen, when you're going through?
Yes.
Yeah. Like, what's your process?
So it's a you know, as you know, I just shot a race a couple of weeks ago, and I shot I think 6,000 frames over 3 days, about 2,000 a day, and I have to cull those down to like maybe the top 10 that my PR director wants. So I have to go through really fast. A lot of photojournalists use Photomechanic, and they have a structure where they go through and they sequentially kind of identify what they might say are selects. So out of, say, my morning take might be 500 images, I might go through and identify my top 50 selects real quick, really fast, and then I'll go through this sequentially with increasing scrutiny and find out which one of these really kind of meets the needs of what I want to say for this photograph at a given time in the race, and then those become keepers. So there might be, Jeff Shewy did a nice series on this Luminous Landscape a number of years ago about how he did his editing, but basically it's a process of kind of triaging down from the overall take down to a set of selects, and then from a set of selects down to a set of keepers. And then the winners, the hero shots, are the ones that are going to go in the newspaper, right? Yeah. And it's kind of just winnowing down selectively. So I start big, and I'll cut 500 to 50, and then 50 to 10. And then there might be 2 winner or hero shots at the end for the end of the weekend, like, you know, the champagne in the laurel wreaths and all that stuff.
Yeah, like that. I asked this question to some photographers over the years, and I think that the answer is there is no answer, right? So it's all subjective. It depends on what works with your brain. Like, I'm more of a binary type person, you know, with very little gray area in a lot of things in my life, it turns out, but very little gray area in between. Either it's this or it's that, you know, and if you're in that bucket of a tree like that, you're in this bucket. But
Julio says it's hell yes or hell no.
Yeah, you know? exactly. Especially with images, either it's good or it's bad, right? So it's either it's so I'm a flagging person. So either it's got a flag or it doesn't have a flag, which makes it easy to sort. But what I want to know from you, Stephen, before we move on to this next question, next one's from Trevor, is what, you know, when you're going through your images and you find some that are obviously not good, shots of your foot, out of focus, whatever. What do you do? Like,
I X them out.
Do you delete them off of your hard drive?
I just hit X in Lightroom, and it rejects them. And then when I'm done for the morning take, I'll just select all the rejected ones and just delete them from my hard drive.
Okay, so you get rid of those. You don't waste space with those.
No, because they might be like a car that's out of focus, or it might have the camera misfocused from the hot track syndrome. Nobody's heard about that, where the track's so hot the camera can't autofocus, stuff like that, whatever. And I just, if the car is soft, I can't read the signage on the car or the lettering or the graphics, whatever reason they go, I don't need. And I'm shooting 2,000 frames a day, right? And I need to deliver 20 maybe at the end of the day. And I'll keep some in reserve for other future things. But, I don't need 10 shots of a car going through a corner.
The reason I ask is the thing that always pops up when you ask people that question, or that pops into a lot of people's minds, is you remember that old Monica Lewinsky photo with her reaching in the crowd to shake Bill Clinton's hand? That was found in the archive of the stuff that probably should have been deleted from the photographer, but he just dug through and he found it, and now it's an iconic kind of photo because they clearly knew each other at the time, but they're acting in the crowd as if they didn't know each other. So it's those kind of things. Do you ever worry about, one day, if I delete that guy, he may be involved in some controversy and I'm going to want that shot? Do you ever think about that?
I do. I mean, for me, the stuff that I pretty much delete is the car's not in focus, or parts of the car chopped off because it's gone out of frame, because it's gone 150 miles an hour as it goes past me. And you don't always get the entire car in the frame when you're like 25 feet from it. But I'll keep everything else. And so sometimes I'll get requests from my PR directors. Hey, do you have a vertical of like the Toyota coming down through turn 4 at Sonoma, something like that? And I'll have to dig through the archives. But anything that's soft or where the car is cut off just gets axed.
Okay, cool. All right. Next question is from Trevor. So Trevor says, this week in photo, what's Canon and Nikon, more so Nikon, strategy in holding back features in their mirrorless cameras? Long term, the transition to mirrorless can't be denied. Why hamstring people? So you may have your own opinion on this. My opinion is, I would imagine that there's sort of an evolution of man poster with cameras on it in Nikon HQ, right? So they're like, okay, in 2018 we're going out with this, and then in 2019 we'll add this second memory card slot, and then in 2020 we're going to do this, and so they're going to drip feed the features out, because otherwise why show your entire hand when you first launch a product? Of course they know what everyone wants, right? You had to be an idiot not to know what an ideal camera would be after all these other camera manufacturers spent so much time maturing the market for you, right? So you could, like, Nikon could easily come in and say, well, what do people like from Sony? They like this. What do they like from the Panasonic side? They like this. What do they like from Fuji? Oh, that stuff. Okay, let's mix all that together and make the ultimate holy grail camera and, cannibalize all their markets. They could have done that, or they could just create a toe in the water, release it, see how it is absorbed into the market, see what people like, what people hate, let the market think about it, release another camera, add another feature, and on and on and on and on. That would be my opinion as to how they do stuff, based on, I would say, qualified experience, let's say.
Yeah, so. I would add maybe 3 comments to that. Clearly, they're going to create a portfolio of products where they're going to scale functionality and features over time. Yeah, that's just going to be a normal progression of how cameras evolve and become more differentiated in a market. But I think what folks aren't understanding is these cameras were probably well into development 3 years ago, because doing this kind of development doesn't happen in a year or even 2 years, especially if you're doing it for the very first time. It was probably a 3-year project. And when they started out with their marketing requirements, Frederick, and their product requirements 3 years ago, Sony didn't have 2 card slots and eye control and IBIS in their cameras either, and nobody else did. And so that's what they locked on for their product requirements probably 3 years ago. Then they had to build the thing and get all of the manufacturing and R&D done in the manufacturing infrastructure in place to do this. Yeah. And I think they got caught with their pants down a bit, because Sony already had done that homework 3 to 4 to 5 years earlier, with their first series of cameras that weren't that great with many of these features as well, right? Sony's already paid that price of pain, poor focus, no lenses, and wonky, features or limited functionality, whatever. They've had 5.5 years to develop, right? But I'll bet you that the Nikon Z camera and the Canon EOS 5, EOS R, they were in development 3 years ago, right?
Yeah,
and if you think 14 months ago, before the A7R3 and the A9, the Sony cameras didn't have 2 card slots either.
Yeah.
And they didn't have IBIS either.
That's right. Yeah. Now we're spoiled, and we think we need it, and we complain.
I think they got caught out a little bit because Sony had a lead in terms of their technological development infrastructure because they've been at it longer, right? But they still had to put it out because they have to recoup their investment, the return on investment for the development of the products.
Yeah.
So what are they going to do? Not release the camera? They got to release the camera.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. So it's all timing, right? And you bring up a good point. Before we go on to this next question, is the level of secrecy and how they were able to maintain that secrecy. Like here in Silicon Valley, there's some companies, usually the obscure companies, they're able to hold secrets, but even big companies like Apple leak, right? And like right before you start seeing, oh, this is the new iPhone, this is going to look like, exclusive stolen photos or whatever. We didn't hear a peep about any of this stuff. At least I didn't. Maybe I'm moving in the wrong circles, but I didn't hear a peep about any of these releases from Nikon or Canon or any of these guys. I was privy to some of the stuff that Panasonic was doing, but I didn't know what these other guys were releasing. How are they able to keep their kimonos closed so tightly?
I think Japanese companies can be extremely disciplined when they put their minds to it. Yeah. This is the strength of their companies. The other thing that's important, I think, is that when you really think about, two things are important, and I don't want to beat on full frame because there's lots of people for which that product platform creates a lot of value. But number one, the ratio of sales of smaller format cameras to full frame is on an order of 7 or 8 to 1 of APS-C or micro four thirds to full frame. So there's a lot of fish in a fairly small pot, a lot of sharks in a fairly small red ocean right now that are fighting for the premier, what's viewed as the premier market segment, and that's fine, and good things will come out of that. Cameras now, if you think about it, they're only being differentiated at the very extremes of the performance envelope, right? I mean, the things that these cameras are doing now that they're being differentiated on they're like Canon 1D level class of performance, right? Like tracking autofocus of something that's moving 150 miles an hour, or eye focus on a lion running through the jungle, or 693 autofocus points, right? The 80% of the people that are buying cameras will never use those extreme edges of the performance envelopes at all. Yeah, they don't care, and that's why they're going to buy Canon and Nikon mirrorless bodies, because it meets their needs for what it offers them. Yeah, that's true. I mean, there's different segments of the market, right? Like we were talking about earlier, the commercial and advertising segment of the photographers, like the Jake Hickses of the world, right? Right. Those folks could run rings around people with cameras that you have laying in the bottom of your closet, right? Exactly. A Canon 5D or something, right? Right. They don't necessarily need I gotta have the latest and greatest thing. Oh, I have to fly to Photokina to look, because I have to have this thing, or else I'm not going to be complete. They're not those people. They're a different ilk of photographer. It's so strange. And the first time I've been talking to photographers for years, obviously, but the first time I marinated with them was in Puerto Rico, and just in a crowd of people whose work would just blow your mind, and they're just sitting there, sloppy, having a beer, it's like, you don't hear the discussion about, hey, what do you shoot with? What do you shoot with? Oh, you shoot with that. Okay. Well, you should shoot what I would shoot with. You don't hear that stuff. It's like, what do it might skew to lighting and what kind of lighting you're using, or what kind of, who you chose, Broncolor versus, pro photo versus whatever. But it's not about the camera, because that's just a box that captures the light. In the 15 years I've been sitting in media centers and covering professional motorsports events with credentials, I never hear those discussions either. Right. ever. And nobody gets into fights over which brand people are shooting with, right? Like there's about 60% of guys shooting Canon and about 40% of guys shooting Nikon, and they're not getting into it with each other about like, well, why are you shooting with one or the other? They've got more important things to do, like getting images out to Getty for deadline press.
Yeah, right? It's like chefs arguing like, you know, my food tastes better because I use this kind of stove. You know? All right, let's move on. Another question. Let's see. Let's see. I think this is another one from Trevor. No, here's one from Janet Robinson. So Janet says, she says, what's going on with Olympus? They don't seem to be offering any new bodies. Yeah, that's a good question. Olympus has been a little bit silent over.
Very silent.
Yeah, I wonder what's going on. I wonder if there's, I mean, I don't want to speculate. I have no idea what's going on, like literally zero idea. And maybe they'll surprise us, but you know.
Maybe they'll put out a medium format camera, who knows?
Yeah, yes, and it's interesting Olympus wasn't in that consortium with Panasonic, Leica, and Sigma.
No.
Right?
You know what I read today, Frederick, that was interesting is Sigma's going to come out with a mirrorless camera, full frame, with a foveon sensor. So my cat's going up on the desk here. So the CEO of Sigma loves that foveon technology. It's a personal kind of pet project for him. So he's not giving up on it. Clearly, there's clearly strengths into that sensor technology that aren't fully refined yet. Maybe they're going to refine it, but Sigma's coming out with a full frame foveon mirrorless camera. Good. Which will be another little interesting digression off into another, technological path.
Some more food for your analysis paralysis. Perfect.
There you go.
All right. Last question is from Trevor. Trevor says, this week in photo, why has Sony still not made any substantial statements regarding the A7S III? It's a highly anticipated camera with a strong following. The market base is different than the A7 III. I don't know. I have no idea.
Japanese discipline, not talking about stuff until it's ready.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, look what they did with the A7 III, right? Nobody knew what that camera was going to do when it came out, right? Boom. Yeah. And then everybody's completely blown away. Yeah. So, there's Canon and Nikon did the same thing, right? I think this is just Japanese corporate discipline keeping things under wraps until they're ready to launch.
Yeah, yeah. It's exciting though. I mean, and thanks everyone for all your questions. I think the Q&A segment of This Week in Photo is valuable because it gives us kind of a pulse into what people are thinking beyond, just Stephen and I rattling things off. So, let's get your opinion into TWiP. TWiP is about everyone, not just us.
Absolutely.
So we're just about at the end of the show. I want to once again thank our sponsor for This Week in Photo, and that's our friends over at Bay Photo. You can get 25% off your new account at bayphoto.com, or just go to twip.pro/bayphoto so that we can count you. And you'll get your discount. And what we were talking about earlier, Stephen, was just sort of the importance of printing these days. And I talk about this a little bit from time to time. And it's not just hyperbole about printing. It is like in my world, I'm in like you and I were talking about earlier, I'm kind of in this constant state of less is more and refinement. Yeah, there's a print right there. Yeah, constant state of less is more and refinement, and how can I make life better? How can I do the same amount of stuff more efficiently? That's why my setup here is in a constant state of evolution. And printing is part of that, I think, because printing and this is why, I mean, I owned, do I still own it? I think I may have given it away. An Epson 3800 printer, right? So love that printer. It was big, but it should have been paying rent because it needed its own space. It needed to be regularly used, and the ink would dry up when I was ready to use it. It was just a process. It was never quite calibrated right. It was because I'm not printing all the time. If you're printing all the time, then it makes sense to own a printer, right? But if you're not printing all the time, then it made less sense for me because I would just look at it and like, I could be using that space for something else. But enter these labs like Bay Photo. So Bay Photo, you can color calibrate to them, so they essentially become your printer with multi-million-dollar gear that you send your file to, and it shows up a day or so later on your doorstep, and you got your prints. Giant prints that you could never print at home, or small prints, or metal prints, or
canvas,
or canvas, or whatever. You can do all of that stuff. So, and you can do it from your laptop. So you could be sitting there doing your capture one, edit, boom, spit out a TIFF, upload it to these guys. A couple days later, you got your print. Right. So that stuff I think is really important, and I'm excited. I'm happy that they're a sponsor of This Week in Photo, but I'm also happy that printing itself seems to be enjoying sort of a resurgence into the way that we're doing stuff beyond just the junk food photography that's Instagram or sharing it on Facebook, and then you never see it again because it's sort of buried in a sea of other great photos. Right. So
absolutely. Yeah.
So do you print at home, or do you print with a lab?
I print at home. I spent a lot of time kind of learning color management and workflows, and took a course with Andrew Rodney at the Santa Fe workshops on color management way back in the day. So I like the process of printing, but I'm definitely going to explore Bay Photo and maybe some of the other companies. But, in a way, you can't see it, but I've got prints literally all around my small townhouse condominium here on every surface, including on the refrigerator door. I've got a GFX 50S print, a beautiful black and white print on the freezer door of the refrigerator.
Great.
An architectural print. So I've got prints all over the house, and it's nice to see them and look at them and reflect on them. But I think in a way, what Bay Photo is doing, and some of these other companies that's really nice, is they're offering a product for folks that are not cranking out prints every single day, or producing like 365 projects where you're printing every day, keeping the cat off the desk here, printing every day, and putting them in a portfolio box where you have 365 prints in a box at the end of the year, right? That's where you might want your own printer. Yeah. But if you're printing a dozen prints a year, or 20 prints a year,
or you're printing for clients, right?
Or you're printing for
wedding
clients,
photographer, your portrait photographer, whatever. Right?
Kevin Mullins with his A Day in the Life series, right? If you can get the thing is that you want from printing is consistency, right, and precision and accuracy, right, and companies like Bay Photo that can do that for you because they've got it dialed, right? You're going to get a consistent product time after time, and that's what you want, and that's what your customers want if you're delivering prints for customers or for family members, right?
Yeah,
so in a way, it's kind of like lens rentals, where you don't have to purchase that medium format camera to try it out anymore. You can rent it for a bit and get what you want when you need it. In a way, these printing services give you the same sort of option of getting just what you need when you need it, and not having a big 3880 like I have in my bedroom sitting on its own desk.
See, now, I told you, real estate, right? It's real estate. You're taking up a lot of space with that print.
It is. Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, like you said, there are people like you that enjoy the printing and print at a frequency that it makes sense to have that printer, and then you're running paper and ink through it all the time, and you're calibrated. But if you're the person that every now and then you're like, I need to make a print of that, let me make a print, and then you crank up the printer and you say,
I can't make a print on metal, right?
Right.
I've got some prints that would look great on metal, and so I'm definitely going to give them a try for some metal prints, because Jeff was saying a couple of weeks ago that he's got some prints on metal that look great.
It's
so I'm
brilliant. It's a different world printing on metal,
and they're just down the road from us here too. So
they're Bay Area based.
Yeah,
cool. All right, well, Stephen, we're at the end of the show. Where can people go to connect with you and see some of your work, and maybe ask you a question or two?
So people can find me at stephenscharf.com, www.stephenscharf.com, and Instagram at racing_the_light. And they can reach me by email at stephen@stephenscharf.com.
Excellent. And thanks a lot for coming on the show, man.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me on.
I chose, like on that Indiana Jones episode, I chose correctly, because I always try, the secret is to work with people that are smarter than you. So, here you go. I've been sticking by that.
I could chat for a long time, Frederick.
Yeah, I know, totally. We have.
Yeah.
All right, Stephen, thanks a lot.
Cheers.
And
cheers.
And folks that are watching this, thank you for all the participation in the chat room. Thank you for all the questions. If you're watching this in the replay, try to catch us live so that you can hang out in the chat room. If you want to subscribe to This Week in Photo, head over to thisweekinphoto.com/subscribe. That'll give you a list of all of our RSS feeds. But we're everywhere. TWiP is on Spotify. We're on Stitcher. We're on Google Play. We're on iTunes. We're everywhere. So just search for This Week in Photo, and you'll find us on your favorite platform of choice that supports podcasting as well as YouTube. And with that, folks, it is time to take that lens cap off. This is TWiP.